For many years now, I've had the privilege of teaching hundreds of students who say that they feel called into ministry. So, what exactly does it mean to be called into ministry? It's interesting because the church in which I grew up, we weren't expecting some divine, supernatural sign, a manifestation of speaking in tongues when one is called into ministry, a special prophecy, or a miracle, something like that. Instead, our church, a cessationist church, believed that when God called you into ministry, He just kind of put what they used to call a leaning on your heart or some vague notion. Some people in my church would talk about their call to ministry as being a set of circumstances that worked out just in a specific way. In the more charismatic and Pentecostal churches, they are often thinking about God giving them some type of audible, visible, a vision or a dream or a prophetic word of some sort. So you'll notice that there are different ways of understanding what it means to be called into ministry. There are many, many people across cessationists, charismatic, and different, variations in between of churches who have felt a call to ministry. So what exactly does it mean to be called into ministry? This is one of the things hopefully you'll be thinking about this week. But the answer that I've given to students is there are certain elements of everyone's call to ministry that are probably similar. Like there's a general calling that God gives to people who are headed into ministry with a passion, with a heart for people, and gives them a desire to kind of lay aside everything else and just make that their full-time job, if you will, or their full-time career. And so that's what I tended to see when I felt like I was receiving my call into ministry. One of the things you can do to find out the differences or distinctions between different people and their understanding of call to ministry is just ask them. Ask of someone who's a pastor, a missionary, or someone who's felt called into full-time ministry, vocational ministry. What was that like in your particular situation? Let me tell you my story real quickly. I think you'll find this interesting this week. I grew up in a Christian home, and so I already knew that, from an early age, I should follow Christ. I became a Christian when I was just a kid. I went to church on a regular basis. I was in the Word deeply, individually, apart from church, and had a passion for the things of God. But it really wasn't until I was 14 years old. There was a certain evening I was recuperating from pneumonia. I was coming out of this few weeks of being sick from pneumonia, and I had a really good time of prayer with the Lord in my kitchen. So I'm at home in my kitchen, and I'm having this conversation with God. Now, I didn't hear anything audibly. It's not like God said, hey, Ken, I want you to go into ministry. This is what I want you to do. But it was almost like in the silence of that prayer, when I paused and stopped talking a little bit, it was like I felt God was asking me a question. And this is the question He asked me. Would you be willing to be the pastor of the Northside Gospel Center in Chicago? I'm like, well, that's really specific, and absolutely not. But the reason this thought popped into mind is I think the guy who made the biggest impression on me as a pastor was the guy who was a pastor at the Northside Gospel Center in Chicago when I was a kid. He was actually my parents' pastor when they were in youth group. He had been the pastor there for about 50 years. So this guy made a tremendous impact on me. I think the reason why God put this question in my mind is He wanted to ask me, are you willing to be a pastor? Are you willing to serve me in ministry in a role where you really highly venerate this person? Do you think I can put you in that kind of situation? So it was almost like a faith moment. And I remember answering that question, yes, Lord, if you give me the strength to do that, I think I could do that. But I'd be awfully scared because the guy who's the pastor right now, man, he was awesome. And then this was the other question I had that night that I felt like God was asking me. This is going to be funny, though. Are you willing to be a missionary in Africa in a jungle where there are lots and lots of mosquitoes? Oh, I hated mosquitoes. Why in the world would I want to be a missionary in Africa where there's a bunch of mosquitoes? I really didn't want to be a missionary before that point in time when I was 14 years old. But God asked a fair question, I felt like, or that's what He put on my heart. So I got thinking about it, and I said, well, God, if you really wanted me to go to Africa, whether it's Chicago or Africa, to be a pastor, to be a missionary with mosquitoes or indoors or whatever, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I felt like that conversation when I was 14 years old was the moment in my ministry that I refer to as God's calling me into ministry. Now, I had no idea what particular ministry God was calling into me. He kind of suggested pastor, suggested missionary, or I felt like that's where my head was. So I was thinking about that. I was thinking maybe about youth pastor or different things. When I went off to college, I knew I wanted to get a Bible degree. I wanted to head towards seminary and, do something ministry-wise. But I didn't know exactly which ministry I should get into. This is another cool part of the story. So one day, I'm not a good student. By the way, I had a 1.5 grade point average my senior year of high school. So by the time I got to Bryan College and was a sophomore at Bryan College, I transferred in my sophomore year. I'd gotten a little bit better of a GPA, but I was still kind of on rough ground. This girl comes running into the class. I remember it was spring semester, my second semester at Bryan. She comes running into the class and she says, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know that there was a quiz in our class. We were supposed to read 3 chapters, and I never read the 3 chapters. I have no idea what's going to be on the quiz. I've never had this professor before. Hey, you've had this professor before. You did the reading. Why don't you tell me what's in the book and give me some idea what's going to be on the quiz, like what kind of questions this guy asks, and that way I won't completely flunk." And I thought, oh my goodness, you're asking the wrong guy. Why didn't you ask anybody else who has a higher GPA than I did? But she was cute. So I'm like, okay, I'll answer the question as best I can. I spent 10 minutes with her summarizing the 3 chapters that I read, giving her an idea what kind of questions would be on the quiz from my experience with that professor the semester before. And when we took the quiz, guess what? She holds up the quiz and she's like, I got 100%. I looked down at my quiz. I only got an 80. An 80. She scored better than I did on the quiz, and I'm the one who taught her what was going to be on the quiz. It dawned on me in that moment. I realized something from that experience, what God was adding to my calling. It wasn't just a call to ministry in general. See, God, when he calls people to be a teacher, they don't necessarily have to be the people with the highest GPA. They might be, but they don't have to be. They don't have to be tremendous successes at school themselves. Maybe they were a failure, like I was in high school, and then figured out how to overcome that, figured out how to learn, figured out how to read better and take tests better and study better. So I didn't feel like I was great on reading, but I was really good on explaining what I read. I began to realize as I went on to seminary and then eventually went on to a PhD program and started teaching, this is what God was calling me to do in ministry. It's not that I had to be the smartest person in the room, but just that I was able to explain things to people in such a way so that they could grow. You see, teaching ministry is about helping students learn and students grow. It's not so much about what you can brag about and how much you know. I mean, some professors can be like that, I guess, and they're kind of fun if they really are that smart. But many of us who are professors are just kind of, we're good at explaining things. So my call to ministry really came in 2 stages. One, God asked me some tough questions during a time of prayer when I was 14, and I felt like from that time forward, God was calling me into ministry. And then that experience I had with this girl, actually, I ended up marrying her, so the story ends well. That's how I realized that I was going to become a teacher. Now, if you ask today, my wife, is your husband a genius? She'll be like, no. But he explains things really good. But she and other people have looked at what God's given me and they go, yeah, teaching is what you're really supposed to do. I have a heart for people. And so even though I'm not a senior pastor in a church, I feel like I'm in full-time ministry and that God called me here because of the unique way that he presented the opportunity to me and kind of guided events in my life and really led me in this direction. Now, that's my calling story. But if you ask other pastors and other missionaries and teachers, if they feel called into ministry, what did that entail? You'll probably find some different answers. All of them will say that they felt a very, almost an irresistible call to that particular vocation. But the particulars of each person's story are as unique as the personalities that God has to work with in the first place. I think that has a lot to do with how the Holy Spirit works among us today. Anyway, that's my story. Hope you enjoy it, and maybe you'll consider those things. You're figuring out what's your calling, just in general in life or in ministry in particular. God bless you.